Hi loves, happy Tuesday. It's Colleen here from Cellular Life Wellness. It's a cold, snowy day in Canada, so I was literally shoveling snow at 3 o'clock this morning. Um, I have some perspective to share on an important topic that has been coming up a lot recently, and so I should warn you, I'm particularly passionate about this, so excuse me if I get ahead of myself. Um, so yes, for me, human development is very important, and part of my own process of human development is that I've done various things, including being a healthcare worker, early childhood development, yoga, meditation, but I'm also an economist. So I also have a degree in finance and economics. And for me, part of human development and helping people with the topic of trauma is that it's important to have an understanding of economics, politics, and culture. I've written a few things down so that I can give you as much information as possible in as shortest time as possible. So the conversation of intergenerational trauma keeps coming up, and this topic of conversation is mostly coming out of Australia and Canada. So part of economics is that I'm very much aware of trends. I'm very much aware of the trends of economies and the trends of healthcare, and then of course the trends of culture. So my opinion on the intergenerational trauma conversation is that intergenerational, or the belief of intergenerational trauma, is a fallacy, and it is a cultural belief system which really disempowers people. So the conversation of intergenerational trauma keeps coming up in that people are saying things like, we need to rescue, save, and fix or help these people because they've experienced trauma 2 generations ago, or there's a story of trauma that has been experienced by people 3 generations ago, and so there's this like cycle of trauma has been passed down. So I've mentioned a number of times I've lived and traveled through various countries, and so for me this has given me a very broad perspective of how people deal with traumatic experiences, how cultures and economies develop, and how people function as a cultural group. And so with that basis, this is very much the reason why I'm saying this belief of intergenerational trauma being passed down is particularly disempowering and harmful. So this is some information as a comparison. The Vietnam War ended in 1975. The countries that were involved and directly impacted by the Vietnam War was Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Burma. And then also a country that experienced and was devastated by war, which was World War II, was Japan. So these 6 countries I have spent a great deal of time in, and all 6 countries were essentially to some degree either gutted or very much directly impacted by either the Vietnam War or Japan being World War II. So as far as intergenerational trauma is concerned, it's important to realize that every single person that is alive right now is a descendant of someone who has survived a war. So whether that is World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War, the Iraq War, or whatever war, there's been countless invasions that's happened over the years. Every single human that is alive right now is a descendant of someone who has survived war. So the economic structures and the political structures of these 6 countries were different when they experienced the Vietnam War. Cambodia experienced genocide, and approximately 2 million people died either by starvation or execution by their own government. And so when I lived in Cambodia, it became very clear to me that the result of the Vietnam War and the result of the genocide that Cambodia experienced essentially destroyed the family unit. And so this was very much how the Khmer Rouge operated and controlled the population, in that they destroyed the family unit, they started using child soldiers, and trust within the culture was entirely destroyed. So nobody knew who was connected to the Khmer Rouge and who wasn't. There was a lot of fear. And like I said, approximately 2 million people were destroyed in a brutal, brutal way. So that did impact the following 2 generations in terms of the main difference with Cambodia is that they were kind of rescued to a certain degree by the Vietnamese. So the Vietnamese helped them recover from the genocide. Vietnam, on the other hand, I lived in Vietnam for some time and I taught there and I experienced the culture and I learned a great deal from these people. And so for me, the Vietnam as a case study for the recovery of trauma is important because the main difference between Cambodia and Vietnam in the mindset of the people and experiencing the cultures at that time is that the Vietnamese people were particularly proud. They had a strong sense of national pride and they had a very strong belief in Ho Chi Minh. So when I lived in Vietnam, for many people, if I asked them what their faith was, they would say, I believe in Ho Chi Minh. And so Ho Chi Minh essentially was the leader of the nation who picked the Vietnamese people up after the Vietnam War. And right now, Vietnam is listed 45th in world GDP. So they have a GDP at the moment of 223.9 billion US dollars, whereas Cambodia is only 22.1 billion US dollars. And keeping in mind also that Cambodia is landlocked. So the difference between the 2 countries is that the Vietnamese did get foreign aid. They did have foreigners that came in to help them, but their approach, and when I was there and lived there as well, the approach was very much, teach me your skills and then you can leave. So you are here to teach us how to take care of ourselves. You are not here to save us. Whereas in Cambodia was a little bit different at that stage. The self-esteem of people had pretty much been totally destroyed. And Cambodia now does have an economy, but a lot of the economy and a lot of the Cambodian labor work in sweatshops for foreign nationals. Then there is Thailand. They were impacted by the Vietnam War. The Thai people did experience a certain level of trauma, but they are predominantly a Buddhist nation, and so their approach to their mindset and their approach to life is entirely different. They are 8th largest. Their economy is 8th largest in Asia. Their GDP is 455.2 billion US dollars. Then we have Laos. Laos was pretty much destroyed from the Vietnam War. A lot of people had limbs blown off. The country was mined. There was a lot, when I was there were still areas where you couldn't walk because it was still, the land was still alive with the live mines. The country was totally impoverished. And so when I was there, they did have food programs in place, but the food programs that were in place were put in place by foreign aid agencies. And so even though the Laotian people were producing food on their own land, that food was being exported to China across the border, and yet they were importing food that was coming in from Switzerland in cans. So they were importing preserved foods in cans, even though their own people were producing food for their own country. And so it's important to say that those foreign aid agencies are economically designed. And so for me, that's one of the reasons that I never donate money to foreign aid, because I've seen the impact of how things actually play out on the ground, and it's not always favorable. Laos is $16.8 billion in terms of GDP. And so they experienced large-scale trauma. Their population experienced large-scale trauma. However, their political system, they fell to communism. So, and their country is landlocked. So that also makes a difference. Burma was also directly impacted by the Vietnam War. The country was also mined. But Burma has bounced back in the last few years. They have 69.3 billion in GDP, but they have ocean resources and they had a military government in place. So as soon as the military government and their political structure shifted, their offshore oil resources and their gem trade was essentially bought up by foreign corporations. So for these five, Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Burma, all of these people experienced significant trauma. Thailand to a lesser degree, but Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and Burma experienced large-scale trauma. The difference between these nations and what we see in, say, Canada and Cambodia is that they have no social structure in place. There is no safety net for people, and so the only thing that they could rely on to recover for themselves was being resourceful. And so these people are immensely resourceful, regardless of the genocide, regardless of the destruction that was caused by war, and regardless of the trauma that they experienced. They are immensely resourceful, and they do not have a victim mindset. They are very proud people, and they want to take care of themselves. So there's a large degree of entrepreneurship. There's a lot of people who have small little stores that sell food, that sell wares. They very much take ownership for their their income generation. And so once people can, once they believe in themselves and they are able to move forward and recognize what their strengths are and recognize what opportunities they are, there is not this victim mindset of, we have been impacted by intergenerational trauma and so therefore we are stuck in this story. So it's very important for me to share this because a lot of people come to me because they're recovering from trauma, and one of the first things that they say is, I just need someone to believe in me. And so having lived in these countries and seen the comparison between, having seen how they have recovered from significant destruction of their culture and for Cambodia, the culture was destroyed. The Vietnamese culture was not destroyed, and the Thai culture was definitely not destroyed. Having someone that simply believes in you and having someone that brings out your strengths when you've experienced large-scale trauma is one of the single most important things to recovering from a traumatic experience. If you keep telling people that they're a victim and you keep telling people that they've been impacted by intergenerational trauma and they need to, there's also like discussion of you need to heal your ancestors. We're going to do ancestral healing in order to heal your intergenerational trauma. This keeps people stuck in the story of being a victim, and it does not help them move forward in any stretch of the imagination. It is immensely disempowering. So I hope this gives you some food for thought. I have no doubt that there's going to be people that will totally disagree with what I have just said. But as I've shared, economic and political trends and structures are important to see how nations and see how cultures recover from trauma. It's not just one person that has experienced it, but the mindset of the person when they are in a process of healing is immensely important. So if you are working with communities or if you are working with people recovering from trauma, the single most important thing is to allow people to bring back their self-confidence and to have people who believe in them and to bring out their strengths, not to put them into this word victim. As soon as the label victim is attached to a person, it is immensely harmful and it is immensely difficult to shift out of that mindset. So, we're almost at 15 minutes. I hope this is valuable food for thought. I hope it's helpful. I hope it's given you something to have a look at. Have a lovely day. Bye.